Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the EMP EDC Nymble. First off though, in the name of full disclosure, I gotta let you know this guy was sent to me by EMP EDC. He reached out to me, I believe, on Instagram, said, "Hey Nick, I've got a knife here that I'd love to have you check out for the channel." But I told him, as always, I'm gonna talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. It might be a gem, it might be junk. Send him the full disclaimer on my website. Nonetheless, he agreed to send it along. We do have to assume, though, this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm doing my very best not to let that affect the nature or the quality of my review. Next thing, let's do some size comparison, and we're going to figure out that this knife is actually not all that big. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2, and what we're going to see is, in terms of sharpened blade length, Rat 2's actually got a little bit more in there, but the knife itself is roughly Rat 2 sized. Here it is against the Spyderco PM2. What we're going to see is, this is not a particularly large knife, and then here it is against the Spyderco Delica. And so again, what we're seeing is this is not a particularly large knife, and it actually has a little... it's right around the same sharpened length as the Delica, maybe very, very slightly less. So in terms of size, this is very, very similar. It is, however, a little bit thicker than the Delica, just generally speaking, because the blade stock is a little bit thicker, and the scales and whatnot. So there is that. Next thing, what the heck is EMP EDC? Well, EMP EDC is a company that is, apparently it's one of those kind of collaboration things where you've got an American designer who is working with an overseas factory. In this particular case, this is QSP, who is a pretty well-known budget knife maker sort of brand, but he's working with an overseas factory to get these guys made. But this is, I believe, the very first model that EMP has really widely released, and certainly the best-known one, and so that's what we got going on here. So let's go ahead and talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very, very interesting little pocket knife here. It's on the good side. Start with, size-wise, I actually like this size a lot. Look, there is absolutely no confusion. I'm a big fan of knives around this kind of a blade length. What we see here is this guy measures right around 3 inches, right? It is right kind of up to that line there. So, this is a 3-inch knife, 100%, and I think as a result, it's got enough blade to do most tasks, but at the same time, it's not going to be so huge and so excessive that it doesn't fit well in pockets and things like that. So, there is that. Next thing, I gotta say, I appreciate very much the way the flipper tab was done here. This is very much a pull-back sort of flipper tab, so it takes a moment to kind of get used to it first, but this means that there is absolutely no pocket pecking. This is a knife that hangs in the pocket just as well as a non-flipper knife, and that's actually great. I really do appreciate that, and I think it is sort of a nice little detail, and a thing that I very much do love to see. So this is a very nice approach to flipper tabs, more generally speaking. Speaking of the flipper tabs, and then thus the action on this guy is very nice, and it's very versatile, because you do have a flipper tab in the back here. You can see it's jimped and whatnot, so you can deploy it using that. You also have an opening hole here, so you can, in theory, although it kind of takes a little doing to get past the detent, you can thumb this guy out and slow roll it if that's your approach. You can, of course, two-hand it, and there is also the ability to flick this guy out using your index and middle finger, depending on how your ergonomics work best. There is also this area here which can serve as a front flipper, and I can usually kind of get it, but it's a very awkward front flipper because this tab is almost even. You really have to apply pressure to this very top part here, and even still, it needs to be sort of very much in that direction rather than in this direction. So it is not a great front flipper in my estimation, but it can be used as a front flipper for some. But more importantly, the action on this is very nice, especially once I cleaned it up. It definitely shipped thread-locked pretty heavily. Not necessarily in the sense of the threads were heavily locked, but there was just a lot of thread locker in this guy. And cleaning that up, everything got a little nicer. So I'm definitely a big fan of that. So I appreciate the action very much. Next thing, the logo on this guy is quite good. I mean, you can see he is absolutely leaning into the EMP sort of thing, which of course is electromagnetic pulse. If that's not something you're super familiar with, I don't exactly know where it comes down into the everyday carry world, but you know what? It's a cool little logo, a little bit of an atomicness to it, which one must appreciate. I also do like the fact that the knife is numbered here. This is number 89 apparently. So there is that. The blade on this guy is nice. What we have here is an M390 steel, according to the manufacturer website, although it is not labeled, at least at any place that I have noticed it. But it is an M390 steel, which is one of the very best pocket knife steels out there. And although I can't vouch too strongly for the heat treat, because I haven't used it extensively, so far it seems to be performing about like one would expect M390 to. But whatever, I can't go too deep there. But more importantly, at least for me and for cutting, this guy comes down to a reasonably thin edge. It's not the oh my god thinnest thing ever, but at the same time, yeah, this comes down to a thin enough edge that I'm absolutely fine with it, and it proves an excellent cutting tool. So there is that. That is very nice. Then finally, on the good side, this has very nice ergonomics, right? This fits in the hand absolutely beautifully. And I feel like this would actually be even better for folks with bigger hands. This is borderline a little bit tall for my hand, but I feel like for somebody who has really big hands, this would work well because there's a lot of extra room for a bigger finger here. This is a small knife for big hands, at least in my estimation. But it works very well for me. It's well designed ergonomically speaking. The clip is very, very well done here, in that it is going to distribute basically the pressure of the clip over a large part of your hand as you're gripping on it here. It is just really nicely done ergonomically speaking. And then having the jimping all the way up to the top here means this is not going anywhere in the hand. I'm just a big fan of that. This is ergonomically very, very well done. And to me, all of that is the good, is that it has nice ergonomics, a nice blade. I do like the logo very much, along with the numbering here. It is a very versatile deployment method with a good action, and it is a very, very nice size with a flipper tab that I think is a lot less annoying than the norm. On the great side to me, one of the things I appreciate very much when I see a brand new design across my table is care. And this is a design where it really feels like the designer cares, or at least has put a lot of thought into it, right? There are a couple of things. Like I already mentioned the clip shape here, which I think is very, very nice ergonomically speaking and works pretty well. And the flip tab is also a really nice thing. But there are lots of little chamfers around this guy. This feels like a knife that is very profoundly well done. If we look at the sides of the jimping here, we see there is a full chamfer here. Little tiny swedge up at the top here. We see lots of good texturing and such. Even putting the frag pattern aside, we see that. We see a lanyard hole that really feels like it's designed a little bit more than just like put on through there. There is some internal milling in here, although it is still a little bit on the heavy side. In fact, there's considerable internal milling, but there's that. And generally speaking, it just feels like a very thoughtful design with a lock bar insert, over travel stop. This feels like it was done by somebody who really spent a long time thinking about how to make this knife really good. And to me, I always appreciate that. It feels like a labor of love. And so, to me, the fact that you get what is a relatively unique design, and yes, I said relatively unique, comment is don't at me. But nonetheless, there is that. And, frankly, it feels like they put a lot of thought into this. So to me, that's what's great, is that this feels like a knife that somebody has spent a lot of time thinking about and trying to get right. On the bad side, to start with, this is unfortunately a little bit hard to get in that the releases are very droppy. It's like, oh, I'm going to release another batch on my website. And you know what? That's fine. And I totally get why that is the reality for a lot of smaller makers. You can't afford to buy $200,000 worth of inventory and ship it off to distributors. But it's a little bit frustrating that at any given moment, in fact, at the moment that I write this review, this is not currently available. I'm going to hold on. I'm holding on to the video, and I'm going to try and drop it when there is either availability or when there will be a drop coming up shortly. But still, it is a little bit frustrating that you can't just see this, go, oh, okay, great. Go to your local retailer or contact an online retailer and pick one up immediately. So that's a little frustrating, but I get it. That's kind of the nature of the beast. Next thing, I already mentioned this, but this is not a satisfying front flipper. A couple of times I've tried, and it's just like you can get it, but it just doesn't work as well as a lot of the other front flippers in my world. Thing is, though, they kind of needed this little bit to be here anyways in order to fill in this gap here so you don't have like a drop down in the middle there. I'm not complaining about it necessarily, but it's not really well designed as a front flipper. And if you are a front flipper addict and you're looking at this like, oh, hey, another one, I don't know that I would necessarily send you that way. Whatever. Next thing, I talked a lot about the design being pretty well done and pretty well thought out, but there are a couple of little missed details in here that could be addressed in a future version. One of which is this little corner here. And although you can see that the corner is broken, it is still a relatively sharp corner right here. And so I would have liked to have seen them kind of round this off in the same way that they've rounded rounded out the gap there at the bottom. Not a big deal, but it is definitely something that they can fix in a little bit. The clip angle is also a little bit strange in that the clip is basically angled like this in the pocket, which means this is going to want to hang like this inside of your pocket, whereas generally speaking, you want a pocket knife to go the other direction. I understand why it is that case, because he's matched the screws here, but I would almost prefer that the clip is a little bit more shallow carry and then orients the knife more properly in the pocket. Little detail, but it's a thing. Also, it is worth noting that the clip is sitting on the frag pattern. It is on top of the land, so to speak, rather than the valleys, and that's good, but still, I would have liked to see a little area where, especially given that this clip is not ambidextrous, where they have like a flat area where the clip should go. It's not as bad as some things where the clip is on the texture, because this texture is relatively smooth, even though it sure doesn't look it, but there's that. But still, those are some little details here that I think could be improved in a future iteration, which is one advantage of the droppy styles of things. Next thing, blade stock on this guy could be a little bit thinner. This is me very much being persnickety, right? I mean, this is, I believe, 3mm, or at least thereabouts. Yeah, right around 3mm blade stock here, and you know what? That's not bad, but at the same time, I tend to like small knives to have thin stock, so they cut even better. This is ground relatively thinly, but I feel like they could get even better results with smaller stock, and it would make the whole knife a little bit less chubby. You can't argue with that too much, with it, but nonetheless, little detail, whatever. Next thing, balance on this guy. So this is really designed to be held in this way, but the point of balance is actually a little bit further back. The point of balance is right about here. So I feel like if they could have done a little bit more internal skeletonization or something along those lines, that would have been very nice. And mind you, I understand that there's an interaction. If you make the blade lighter, then you need to make the back lighter in order for things to balance out. But still, I do feel like they could have balanced this out a little bit nicer, although it's not a terrible thing. It is also a little bit more on the heavy side relative to some of your relatively small knives. What we're seeing here, put this guy on the scale, and we're coming in here at 3.7 ounces an inch. Look, I'm sorry, 3.7 ounces. That's a little bit more than an ounce an inch there. Not the end of any worlds, but it is a little bit on the heavier side. Next thing, we have a knife here which is very, very lock bar pressure sensitive. This is a frame lock, which means that the frame itself here bends down to lock the knife shut. And as a result, it also has the detent ball on there. So if you are putting any extra force on this part right here as you are flipping the knife, if you are gripping it like this with a finger pressing against here, oh, a little bit of fountain pen ink on me, whoops. Anyways, I digress. Then you are going to have a much harder detent. In fact, you saw me fail to flip it earlier when the same amount of fliction would work fine without your finger resting on there. This is a downside, of course, to doing a frame lock, and it's particularly rough for me in the front flipping dimension because I need to be holding it like this, but then I have two fingers sitting on the lock bar here, so you kind of have to train yourself, which again, I think this would work much better with bigger hands. Then I could get that more... see, it's not an action for me. It's not a front flipper. Just don't treat it like a front flipper and life is good. So it is, though, very, very sensitive to lock bar pressure, and that's a thing that you're going to have to deal with. And then finally, on the bad side, this is $300. Now, look, that is not the end of any world, and this is a knife that it's being made by QSP here, but I got to be real. It feels a little bit behind what some of the big factories are able to do under their own brands in terms of value. You have to buy this knife for the love of the design rather than for the value, because the value on this guy is very much outclassed by some other options out there. So to me, all that is the bad. Is that it is pricey, it is very lock bar sensitive, lock bar pressure sensitive, that is, a little bit on the heavier side, balanced a little bit farther back, the stock could be a little bit thinner. They have a couple of little missed details here. It's not really a front flipper, and the release is unfortunately very droppy. On the ugly front, now this is going to be, you're welcome to disagree with this. I'm going to throw this under the ugly for me, because personally, having the frag pattern's fine. Look, frag whatever, have fun, but having the frag pattern only present on one of the surfaces, and these back chamfers not having it at all, aesthetically is way wrong for me. And then not having it on the clip, it just feels like they didn't quite finish the knife, right? It feels like, oh, well, this should have gone down a little bit further. Had the frag pattern extended out a little bit more, then that would have been great. But to me, it feels like the frag pattern is just sort of an afterthought here, or they just like stopped. They took it off the mill before it finished doing the frag bit, down here and down here. I feel like that just, maybe ergonomically speaking, that is the win, and maybe they tried it and realized, oh, that's too much fraction. But at the same time, to me, having it just on this surface is just kind of Like, it's a knife with some very nice lines, but having the frag just there feels like it got run over or something like that, and I just don't care for that. You're welcome to, discount that. You're welcome to toss that in the bad or in the good if you're loving it, but for me, oh boy, that's ugly. And I think it makes a very attractive knife a whole lot less attractive when they don't do the pattern everywhere. So, to me, that's what's ugly here. The partial frag pattern thing feels someplace between incomplete and lazy, and I just don't care for it. But hopefully they, and if you look at some of the past releases without that, I think it just looks a little bit nicer. So hopefully they can address that in future runs, or you just buy one without the frag pattern. Hopefully life is good. So that's the ugly to me, is the partial frag doesn't do it for me. Final conclusion, this is a relatively weird knife. Mostly in the diversity of openings and also in that kind of size range, because it is nice. It's got a good size. It's got a versatile action with the possibility of two-hand, one-hand, thumb, flip, and maybe for some people front flip, but it's got a good logo, a good blade, nice ergonomics, and a design where you can really tell that the designer was really trying hard, maybe accepting this little bit right up here with the fragging. There are some downsides with inconsistent availability, poor front flipping, some missed details, a stock that could be a little bit on the thinner side. The balance isn't quite perfect, a little heavy, a little lock bar pressure sensitive. It's pretty pricey, and the partial frag feels partially done. Altogether, I feel like this is actually a pretty solid knife from a relatively new maker, right? Yeah, there were a couple of places for improvement, but this is pretty damn solid for a first major knife design release. I actually came away from this feeling pretty impressed. Is this a knife I'm going to carry every day? No, not necessarily. I got lots of options in this size range, and for me, the fraction kind of kills that ends it for me. But at the same time, this is a very, very solid choice for everyday carry. I think the biggest question for a lot of folks, though, is going to be that price tag. And there, the biggest question is, what do you consider the competition to be? Because there is a spate of $300 knives lately that are being made by American designers working with overseas factories, right? And if you look at this relative to those, the price is right in line, right? The people seem to be settling at $300 for better or worse. And you know what? There you go. And so, that price tag might be a big downside for a number of folks out there, but if you compare it against those other kind of small batch made by designers sorts of things, maybe it feels a little bit better. But the thing is, and so it's well enough done that if you love the design and that's a kind of lifestyle, if you will, the micro-brandy stuff, if that appeals to you, I can see folks paying this price and feeling fine about it. But the fact remains there is a lot of very strong competition, especially from OEM-based brands out there, right? You can get knives that are, different in design and whatnot, but similarly spec'd for $200 for Concept, a QSP, a Kaiser, Wee, Best Tech, and all of those are going to be a little bit more broadly and readily available, right? So you really have to be wanting to pay for the design. You really want to be having to do the micro brand thing. Otherwise, you can get, I think, a little bit more for your dollar if you go from one of those larger brands. So ultimately, I think the big question for most people is going to come down to the design here. If you're just looking for a knife, it's an absolutely fine knife. It's good to go for everyday carry, but it's a little pricey and availability is weird. But if you love this particular design, if you love this particular knife enough to pay that extra cost and to wait around for the drop, then I can very easily imagine your credit card pulsing for this EMP. Okay. Think of a number of reasons for you to buy it. Anyways, hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.